Good morning, Revolution, everybody, and welcome to our stream. Hello to Anita, Dom, and Scott. I hope everybody's doing good. We have a lot to talk about this morning. We're continuing our post election analysis. And oh my goodness, if you look at what's happening with the Trump appointments to the cabinet, it's really scary if you look at the Democratic Party and the kind of a circular firing squad that's going on. Everybody's blaming the other person. You did this wrong. You did that wrong. You shoulda, coulda. If I woulda, it would have been different. Um, and it raises the question. Uh, we talked about Bernie Sanders a couple weeks ago, and he sent out a second letter in which he expressed a lot of frustration with the Democratic Party and he raised, the will they ever change? And then he said, what are we going to do? And he didn't provide a solution, but it raised the issue implicitly of do we need another political party? And if so, what would that look like? And so I'd like to start the conversation this way, Scott. We used to refer to the U.S. political system as party trap. Anita, you remember that. Two party trap. Is that an accurate description of the U.S. political system today, in your opinion? Scott?
Uh, I think we're definitely feeling the limits of a two-party system, a system with really two institutional parties, because it's not just that there aren't other parties on the ballot or whatever. It's that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are kind of now built-in institutional gatekeepers, like paths to participation in politics, and especially as we see, this mass small d democratic people's movement against fascism and for democracy developing, and we think about coalition building. um, the fact that there's not a formal political structure for a labor-led people's coalition is yeah, it's hard. So we end up, having to um, often, work for candidates that really, yeah, are very limited. That for instance, the Biden administration and its stance on Ukraine and on Gaza, which were very unpopular and which made it hard to you know build a mass, right. So yeah, it's time, you know more and more. More democracy is always better. The movement needs an apparatus, a political apparatus of its own.
Not only were they unpopular, but, arguably criminal, the support of genocide in Gaza. But, Dom, I mean, things have changed. Bernie's, I understand his anger, but Jesse Jackson is on the screen now, and we saw with the Rainbow Coalition the first beginnings of the development of what is now called a progressive wing in the Democratic Party, and they have 100 members, and they're going to elect a guy from Texas as Chicano, Mexican American politician from Austin as the new head of the Progressive Caucus. So you had the rainbow. You have the development of 100 members of the Progressive Caucus. You saw Bernie Sanders come in and run in the Democratic primary as, formerly an independent, now an independent again. But his country changed the whole debate in the country, and they ended up adopting largely the Sanders platform at the 2020 convention. So I put the question to you. Is it still accurate to describe, as Gus Hall and Henry Winston used to, the U.S. political system as a two party trap?
I think it's a little bit of both. It's a trap in the sense that really, realistically, we do only have two options that are viable at this point in terms of a lot of national and state elections. Um, but is it a trap in the sense that the Democrats can't or won't change? Um, I personally don't think that's true because just like you said that when Bernie Sanders came in, he shook things up a lot and changed the entire narrative twice when he ran for president. And really these days, you can't run for any sort of higher office on the Democratic Party side, um, whether that be president or senator or whatever the governor, whatever the case may be, without at least paying lip service to a lot of the things that Bernie Sanders talked about, like healthcare reform. And Democrats aren't saying Medicare for all, but they're saying universal access to healthcare, and they weren't saying things like that prior to, at least not on a national stage, prior to Bernie Sanders running for president, and canceling student loan debt. Right, those are things that weren't really talked about nationally or on national platforms before Bernie Sanders ran for president. So I think the key now is to hold Democrats accountable. It's you said this. You said like Biden said, I'm going to cancel student loan debt, and of course, there's the thing with the courts and so on and so forth. But we want to see, if we're going to say this, we want to see some action, and I think that's the key at this point. And who knows? I don't think it's for us to say whether the Democrats can go further than that at this point.
But Anita, what do you think? I mean, everything that Dom said, everything that Scott said is true.
Hmm.
But we saw in the last iteration of the election,
Right.
Biden dropped out, Harris and Walz came in, started off, with a bang, and then midway they kind of tilted to the right, thinking that the never Trumpers were going to usher them into office. Didn't happen. Two party trap or
Well, I think we are in a two-party track because of the structures that were set up by the founders of the Constitution. Actually, I mean, having the winner-take-all structures really mitigate against having real independent political organization. But I think Dom is right that we can't say if, that the Democrats are locked into a certain strategy and the Republicans are locked into a certain strategy. Instead, it's a constant flow of reaction and action to other parties and within the parties. So I think there is, some room for change, but I think the structures that cause us to have a two-party system are really locked in. And I think part of what you're talking about with the contradictions, there were contradictions. I think you always said, Joe, you can't have a progressive domestic policy and a regressive foreign policy. It's just a contradiction that's out there, and I think that was one thing that did the Democratic Party in this time is that yes, they were dynamic. They changed a lot on domestic issues, but not on foreign policy. It was the same old thing that we've had for 50 years from the U.S. government.
and yet Sherrod Brown in your state didn't run on foreign policy issues. He ran as a economic populist, pro working class, and yet he lost to a Republican car salesman.
Mhm.
Why did that happen?
Well, he was very he you missed some of the advertisements from Sherrod Brown. He had a lot of anti-China advertisements,
Mm.
very anti-Chinese, anti-trade with China. Uh, Bernie, I mean, Sherrod stood up to China, when the Democrats and the Republicans didn't do. That was one of the big ads that was coming out from him. So he didn't make it, he didn't identify himself, he didn't distinguish himself on the foreign policy issues either, sadly.
Bad move, Sherrod. And my home guy, Tim Ryan, did the same thing when he
Yes,
ran for office. Scott, one of the fundamental principles of Marxist politics is the political independence of the working class, right?
Mhm.
The leading role of the working class in the fight for a new society. We cannot say that enough. And its application in conditions of the United States, in terms of the party's strategic outlook, is that we have what we call a inside outside strategy with respect to the Democratic Party. Talk about the relationship between political independence on the one hand and this inside outside strategy with respect to the Democratic Party.
Okay, yeah. So that's a really interesting topic. So political independence, as we understand it, is not something that you just declare, right? That's the first thing we got to get out there. It's not just saying, we're going to do our own thing. The working class is independent, and so Lenin said that the political independence of the working class is sort of measured, determined by its ability to put its stamp on political struggles. So that's what we're working for. If the working class can't do that, if the socialist movement can't, if the party can't do that, then all the declarations of independence in the world are not going to do anything for us, and we will, as Lenin said, for practical purposes, be subsumed into bourgeois political life. So we're working to build a working class led movement for democracy that is capable of orienting, putting its stamp on, influencing, shaping, leading the movement for democracy. And the inside-outside strategy kind of comes out of that, right? The movement is what makes things happen. It's not parties, it's not candidates, it's movements that masses in motion that drive change. So we build the movement, and where we don't have yet the infrastructure, the material conditions for a separate party, we work through and alongside forces in the Democratic Party, and that's the inside. But we're always building that movement and looking to what we call the forces of political independence. So those forces that are working for progressive change outside of the. I hope that summed it up, sort of.
Sounds good, sounds good. But also there are movements that operate inside the Democratic Party but function basically outside. Like for example, the trade unions, you know, they have their own candidate selection process, independent of the Democratic Party. They have their own fundraising efforts, and contribute according to who they like, and they don't contribute to those who they don't like. They have their own get out the vote efforts where they focus on their own membership and so on and so forth, as do a whole number of. And so when we say inside outside, we prefer to work with those movements and forces that are politically independent but who operate inside. Because
That's good.
Dom, go on, Scott.
Yeah, I wanted to throw kind of a question into the hopper, if I could. To what degree do we already have sort of multiple political parties, even sort of cutting through the two, institutional ones? There are significant splits within the Democratic Party. Labor has a more and more independent role in its political work. In the Republican Party, we also see splits between the MAGA fascist forces and establishment, whatever, Republic. Right. So there's like part of the question is, to what degree do these two institutional parties actually capture the real political dynamics that are happening?
Well, that's an interesting question, and you're right. There are splits between the MAGA forces and the neocons, within the GOP. Between both of those and the uh, so-called liberal Rockefeller trilateral commission forces in the Republican Party. And then you have different constituency groups in the Democratic Party. You got the Blue Dogs, you got the progressive wing, you got the Black Caucus, you got the Latino caucus, so on and so forth. And all of those are operating within the framework of these mass bourgeois political parties. I think that's an important point. Uh, Dom, um, you recently drafted a platform, a program around the issue of third Reconstruction. Uh, could you talk about that a little bit and how it might relate to this issue of independent politics uh, and developing a strategy for moving forward in the next period?
Yeah, I was really kind of, I guess you could say, inspired by some of the immediate responses to Kamala's loss, particularly by the Bernie Sanders, well, by Bernie Sanders himself and the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party, it was talked about a couple weeks ago, where they felt that, quote unquote, identity politics needed to be dropped, just to focus on, the quote unquote bread and butter issues. And I think, that whole sentiment is precisely, um, one of the factors why Bernie Sanders lost twice when he was president. And of course, I'm not saying that there weren't other factors. There were, but it's this idea that identity politics is somehow contradictory or impedes working class politics, that I think causes um, Bernie Sanders and other progressives and the Democrats generally to sort of miss the mark. So one of the things that I argued is that, I think that when we in terms of mobilizing the masses of people into political life, I think we have to really dig deeper into the issues that they face, particularly Black workers and Black women. One of the things I talk about is the Black maternal mortality rate. And maybe this is just because I'm in healthcare, but it just blows my mind that it's something that I don't think I've ever heard a politician talk about, but affects so many people. Obviously, of course, Black women, but I think about people who live in rural areas of the country where, the next hospital might be an hour, 2 hours, sometimes further away. And I think if we can talk about these issues, that of course, when we look at the plight of being a Black woman worker in this country, I think, yes, of course, it comes up in their demands and their needs, but also would benefit the whole of American society. So yes, like the Black maternal mortality rate, the price of college tuition, but also, I mean, I think about the fact that I think the reading level in this country is like, I think it's like a third people the average third grade reading level. And it just blows my mind, while the Republicans are talking about, getting rid of the Department of Education. Why was there no counter that, hey, why would we get rid of the Department of Education when Americans read on a third grade reading level? So I think digging into these issues that really, instead of going when we're knocking on doors, or talking to working people, instead of saying, like, what are the issues that you care about? I would much rather say, what are the issues that you care about that politicians aren't talking about, to really get to the crux of the demands that of working people. Um, And again, I think that this is, I think that the difference maker between the democratic socialists and the Marxist Leninists is that we're interested in, you know, not just these quote unquote bread and butter issues that of course will, I mean, anyone could agree with, but really, you know, what is hindering people from engaging in politics or having an active political life, and digging deeper into those issues.
Didn't the working class Anita place its stamp on the election when the issue of reproductive rights was put front and center in the campaign? And didn't the working class put its stamp on the election when it raised the issue of trans rights? Aren't the majority of women and LGBTQ folk workers? And when you raise the issue of voting rights, uh, you know, uh, women, people of color, soon majority. These are working class majorities, and yet the Republican Party and the MAGA forces and a big section of the mass media keep talking about them as if they're separate from working class issues. Meanwhile, the GOP has redefined itself as a working party and championing working class issues, by which they mean a party representing white working men, as if women and people of color are not workers. How did that happen?
Well, I can't tell you how it happened, but I know it's absolutely true that working, I mean, reproductive rights has always been a working class issue. And for a long time, working class women were the ones, and still are, the ones that are most damaged or hurt by uh, Trump bans on reproductive rights. Um, I think we can see that, and I agree with Don that you know the maternal mortality issue is not only not an issue in the political campaigns, but also is going to get much worse because of the bans on abortion. They're closing down reproductive facilities and hospitals. I think there was definitely. I mean, Trump really ran a campaign that was testosterone infused, just anti women and anti trans, but just using trans people as a way of attacking the Democratic Party in general. So I think yes, we do need to be independent, and those issues about women's issues, so-called women's issues, or and trans issues, those are not separate from working class issues. Those are it's working class people who are bearing the brunt of the voter suppression around these issues, and the you know their lives are more in danger, and that's working class people. So it's not a contradiction. There isn't a you know a contradiction between identity politics, or you know it's a false distinction, I think.
I'll tell you how they did it. They did it by allowing to by number one, by refusing to use the word working class. The
Mhm.
Democrats won't use the word working class. They keep describing their platform as a middle class platform. And when I think about middle class, I think about doctors. I think about maybe maybe unfairly, but that's what I think about. I think about doctors. I think about lawyers. I think about business people. Owning Ford dealerships or Chevy dealerships or Toyota dealerships or whatever, who are making 175, 200, $300,000 a year. I don't think about steel workers. I don't think about auto workers. I don't think about sanitation workers, nurses, X-ray technicians. At least in my mind, based on my experience. And so they've allowed the GOP to capture that ground and redefine their platform. But Scott, uh, going back to this issue of how we move from where we are to where we want to be, our party within this inside outside strategy, you know, which is more than an electoral strategy, is also a strategy for a 365, 24/7 approach to building a new politics in the country and a new political movement. And we describe that as an anti-monopoly strategy in which uh, we foresee a process by which a new political party is created that will lay the basis for a new government. Talk a little bit about that process.
Uh-oh, you're muted.
You're muted, Scott. You're still muted.
Okay, now we should be
There
good.
you go.
All right, thank you. So yeah, political parties, like we said before, come into being on the basis of, real material infrastructure, right? You got to have, people that can do the work, run campaigns. You got to have, all the the stuff on the ground that makes it happen. So this process of the anti-monopoly coalition forming and a new party forming around that is about building a broad movement that targets the biggest sort of capitalist corporations, the big businesses, billionaires. So fossil fuels, oil, the defense, pharma, the defense industry. Uh, you know, reining in these tech billionaires that think they can just you know rewrite all the rules and do whatever the hell they want. Right? The anti-monopoly strategy is about building a movement of all the forces that are opposed to them, right? And that includes obviously the working class, but also forces outside of the working class. So the middle class, Joe, like you mentioned, a lot of them, by middle class as Marxists, we mean people that own enough of the means of production to be able to live from their own labor. So small business owners, doctors who have private practices, lawyers who have private practices, stuff like that, right? And a lot of small business owners are feeling the crunch of the crisis of capitalism. So they're part of this anti-monopoly strategy as well. The people's movements, the African American freedom movement, the women's movement, those are part of that movement as well, because the way that capitalism um, attacks democratic rights um, works through um, trying to remove any obstacle to how property can control human life. So that has an impact on the rights of all oppressed people, right? So building that movement and helping a labor-led people's party, that's the term we use in the program, form around that is kind of how we get to the next phase. But it really is, it's not just something that we can decide, right? It's not like, okay, the old phase is done, now we do this new thing. Conditions are developing for something new. And we see it, I think, most clearly in the labor movement, around the role that labor took in these last elections and in 2020, right? So there's the basis is forming for something new.
Anita, Scott used a very deliberate phrase, labor-led People's Party, as opposed to a labor party. What's the difference?
Well, I think a labor-led party implies a broader coalition of, as Scott said, anti-monopoly forces that includes some people. I mean, plenty of people, I'm sure, in the and what you would call maybe a middle class or the petty bourgeoisie of people who can, own enough of the means of production to be subsistent. I think that would include, rather than a labor party. Um, I'm not so sure our labor organizations are always as independent from the Democratic Party as we hope they are. And I think it varies from place to place is how independent they are right now. But yeah, I think a labor party implies something that comes right out of the trade union movement. But the trade union movement, I think, in this country right now is not able to sustain that. Instead, we have to look, like Scott said, to the broader anti-monopoly forces across the board, not only uh, organized labor, but also the people's movements, women's movements, and others.
And that's because of the size and because of the labor movement and because of the nature of the enterprise itself, that you have to have a united front approach to building this new political party, because only when
Absolutely.
you're able to bring together a cross section of forces are you able to confront an enemy as powerful as monopoly capital is today. The labor movement can't do it alone. A workers' party by itself cannot do it alone. It has to do it in alliance with the broadest people's movement. It has to include Black folk, Latino, Asian, women, LGBTQ folks, people from different religious orientations, and so on and so forth. Dom, we have reached. Um, we've been thinking about what happened in the election. Is that your cat? Hi, cat. What's their name?
This is, don't judge me. This is my cat from college. This is Southern Comfort.
Southern Comfort. Are you drinking a little bit of whiskey?
Yeah.
Okay. Dom, we have reached. Um, we've been trying to understand what happened in the election. You know, um, we had a meeting of the board the other night, and we said, how was it that Trump won all the battlegrounds, won the popular vote? And one of the things that I won't say concluded, but that we talked about, you can't blame it on turnout because turnout was up in the battleground states. Kamala Harris won more than Biden did in 2 or 3 of the battlegrounds. Trump won more than that, though. Um, and one of the things that we're thinking about is that there is tremendous anger across the board in the working class, particularly in the battleground states. Because of what happened during the 2008 recession, because of wage stagnation, uh, because of what happened 10, 20 years before when the industrial crisis hit the Midwest and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of jobs were lost. And stagnant wages, we lost our homes during the subprime crisis. Um, which means that uh, working class people are looking for somebody to tear the system down. You know, they didn't care if it was a young black Democrat left of center in 2008, Barack Obama, and they don't care if it's a neo-fascist Republican in the form of of a guy like Trump this time around, because there's a demand for basic economic, political, social change. Lenin once wrote a pamphlet called The Impending Catastrophe and How to Combat It. And he posed the question, can we advance if we fail to advance towards socialism? You know, uh, today, in responding to that anger, can't we put forward, or shouldn't we put forward a platform that raises the same question? Can we advance and address these underlying economic problems, crises actually, that working class people are facing if we fail to attack the billionaires, tax the rich, nationalize the banks, uh, nationalize the military, put them in public hands, uh, address these crises that business people are facing. They're being pushed down into the ranks of the working class, and address these problems in a substantial way, not by tariffs, but by putting this private property in the hands of the workers who produce it. Aren't we uh, uh, not only rapidly approaching, but past the point when we need to take and put forward radical, uh, revolutionary working class measures to address the economic, social, and cultural ills of this country? Or am I too far out in left field?
If you would have asked me this, a month ago or a month and a week ago before we got the election results, I probably would say no, and that there's still room, within the context of capitalism to improve people's lives, and that would be something that we should fight for. Post election, and given what we can reasonably believe Trump will do during his term, I honestly I don't have an answer. I'm not sure. In large part because I don't know how, or we don't see, there's no consensus on how the Democrats will respond. I think a lot of it's true that the economy did get better under Biden, but who cares about the economy on paper looking good when you can't afford to feed your kids, you can't send your kids to school, and sometimes not only can I not afford to send my kids to school, higher education, but during the time that they're in public school, which is also being attacked, there's a risk that they get shot up. So who cares if the economy is good when your needs aren't being met? And I haven't seen any indication. And granted, it's only been a month and some change now, but I haven't seen any indication that the Democrats are going to really internalize this loss and come out with a program that actually addresses some of these underlying economic issues like that you stated, going forward, and I think that remains to be seen. But I think at this point there is a real um, opportunity for us to uh, put forth a different vision for our country. And I think that's what people want. People want a different vision for the whole of the working class want a different vision, a different outlook for our country. And we have a real opportunity to do that.
Anita, can we advance if we fail to advance towards socialism?
Can we advance if we fail to advance towards socialism?
Yeah.
I think we can advance in terms of increasing or decreasing the harm done to working class people. I think we can increase the scope of the arena of contestation that we can engage in more battles in more places. If we that's progress towards something. Eventually, socialism. I think there shouldn't be a contradiction between that kind of progress. To me, progress is progress towards a better world where people's needs are actually met, and where exploitation is not the way, and where exploitation is ended and money hoarding is finished, and basically working against class society. So I think, yeah, I mean, I guess I don't think I think that's a false dichotomy too. I don't think you can have progress towards a better world and not have it be progress towards socialism ultimately.
Scott, what I'm trying the question that I'm posing is that we reached a new political uh, framework in this country, um, where the crisis that working class people are confronting all across the country, but principally in the and we see it most principally expressed in the battlegrounds, where something very basic has to change. Where this anger has reached over the last 8, 12, 16 years a boiling point, um, and that in order to work for working class people to feel and see and experience real change, that radical things need to be done. And so I put the question to you: can we advance if we fail to advance towards socialism, towards fundamentally addressing some of these uh, basic uh, uh, economic woes that we are that our families are facing in a big way, so that we don't. And how do you do that without taking the banks back, taking the steel mills back, taking the auto industry back, taking the electrical, gas, the big tech companies, and putting them in public hands? Can't hear you, Scott. You're muted again.
No, no, we can't advance if we fail to advance towards socialism, I don't think. Because, well, one of my favorite essays from Lenin is something he wrote a few years after the revolution. And he talks about the relationship between democracy and socialism. And he said, you know, stuff like equality for women, like ending the stranglehold of the Orthodox Church over Russian society, like voting rights, all this democratic stuff. We won it because we were fighting for socialism. We fought for democracy as part of our socialist struggle, right? And that because we could take on private property as part of that struggle. And I go back to that a lot because I think that's kind of where we are, right? There's some fundamental stuff that needs to change. We can't the reforms that we can build movements around require taking on the big banks, the defense industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the insurance industry, and we need to be able to make those demands and organize around them. But we also have to be really clear because I think that um, advancing towards socialism is easy to misunderstand sometimes as just like economic issues. Like we gotta address the like economic plight of the working class, and we do. But there is no possible advancement towards socialism without a united working class and the struggles around against racial and national oppression, against the oppression of women, of LGBTQ people, of people with disabilities, of immigrants. All of those things are part of strengthening the working class to the point where it can lead this advance towards socialism. So we can't ever just take the economic questions, like Dom was saying earlier, in isolation from these other democratic needs.
They have to be addressed in tandem. They have to be placed together at the center of our work, at the center of our enterprise, at the center of our coalition building efforts. And we have to reject, I don't care where it comes from, any attempt to separate them. I don't care if it comes from Bernie Sanders. I don't care if it comes from Joe Biden. I don't care if it comes from Donald Trump, Lindsey Graham, or any of them. They have to be pursued together. We need to bring this conversation to an end. We stand for a new political party. We support the creation of a labor-led political party. It has to be, as Anita said, a coalition effort. The issue is, how do we get from here to there? And the way we get from here to there is by pursuing an inside outside strategy. And by the way, part of that strategy has to be for the Communist Party to run candidates. I hear y'all thinking about running in Philly, Dom. Run,
Hell yeah, do
comrade,
it.
run. I hear y'all ran somebody in Ohio. Anita,
We did.
run, comrades, run. Run in Detroit, run in LA, huh? Run in Houston. I hear that they're running in Houston. Run in Baltimore, in DC. We in New York. Somebody's gonna say, "Well, Joe, why don't you run?" It's a
Mhm.
Yeah.
good question. The Communist Party has something to say. We have a contribution to make to this movement, and part of that has to be to raise the need for radical economic, political, and social reforms that move in an anti-monopoly direction. And by that, we mean taking over these big transnational monopolies, putting them in public hands. And all of that is premised on the idea of working class unity. And the only way we can do that is by addressing the issues of women, by addressing the issues of people of color, by addressing the issue of other genders and LGBTQ people. And that is in the interest of everyone, men included, white men included. No one will be left out. Our party has to be responsible for the situation in facing the entire working class, including those influenced by Trump. Thank you for listening. We will be back next week with another edition of Good Morning Revolution. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, and stay in the fight. Bye, everybody, and thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Later, comrades.